Namaya thanked the woman and walked back to her car, feeling stunned and confused. What was going on? Who was the Zach she had met? And why did he claim to live in a house that had been abandoned for years? Namaya felt like she was losing her grip on reality. She had met Zach, she was sure of it. They had talked, laughed, and done things. But now, Namaya, Zahara, and Nadia were known as the party queens of their city. Every weekend, they would hit the bars, dancing and laughing together like they were unstoppable. Their friendship was unbreakable, and their love for adventure was unmatched. One Friday evening, as they were getting ready for another night out, Namaya suggested they try a new bar that had just opened downtown. Zahara and Nadia agreed, and they set out to paint the town red. As they entered the bar, they were immediately noticed by the men. Namaya, with her long, curly hair and bright smile, was always the center of attention. Zahara, with her bold fashion sense, and Nadia, with her infectious laugh, were equally popular. The night was young, and the drinks were flowing. The girls danced and chatted, enjoying each other's company, when a handsome stranger approached their table. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, flashing a charming smile. Namaya, always up for a new adventure, nodded, and the stranger sat down, introducing himself as Zach. Zach was charming and charismatic, with piercing blue eyes and chiseled features. He was well-dressed and confident, and the girls were immediately drawn to him. As they chatted, Zach revealed that he was a successful businessman with a passion for travel and adventure. He regaled them with stories of his exploits, from skydiving in New Zealand to hiking in the Himalayas. Namaya, Zahara, and Nadia were enthralled, laughing and joking with Zach like they had known him for years. He was easy to talk to, and they found themselves opening up to him in ways they never had with other men. As the night wore on, Zach suggested they take the party to his place, a luxurious mansion on the outskirts of town. The girls exchanged skeptical glances, but Zach's charm and charisma put them at ease. "Come on, it'll be fun," he said, his eyes sparkling with mischief. "I'll show you my collection of rare whiskey, and we can dance the night away." Namaya, always up for a new adventure, agreed, and the others followed suit. Zach's mansion was breathtakingly beautiful, with high ceilings, marble floors, and crystal chandeliers. The girls gasped in awe as they entered, feeling like they had stepped into a fairy tale. Zach showed them to the living room, where a fully stocked bar awaited. He poured them drinks, and they sat down on plush couches, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows that offered stunning views of the city. As they sipped their drinks, Zach put on some music, and they danced, laughing and spinning to the beat. Namaya felt carefree and alive, like she was on top of the world. But as the night wore on, she began to notice strange things. The mansion seemed empty. There were no photos, no personal touches, no signs of life anywhere. "Zach, where's your family?" she asked, curiosity getting the better of her. Zach's smile faltered for a moment before he replied, "I'm a loner, Namaya." "I don't have much family." Namaya sensed a hint of sadness in his voice, but before she could probe further, Zahara and Nadia dragged her onto the dance floor, and the moment was lost. As the night wore on, Zach's attention became increasingly focused on Namaya. He couldn't take his eyes off her, and she could feel his gaze burning into her skin. Finally, as they were finishing up their drinks, Zach turned to Namaya and said, "I have to tell you something. From the moment I met you, I knew you were special. I feel a connection with you that I've never felt with anyone before." Namaya was taken aback by his intensity, but she couldn't deny the spark she felt between them. "Namaya, I want to be with you," Zach continued, his voice low and urgent. "I want you to sleep in my bedroom tonight." "Just you?" Zahara and Nadia exchanged surprised glances, but Zach reassured them. "Don't worry, I have a big house. You two can sleep in the guest room down the hall." Namaya hesitated, unsure of what to do. But Zach's eyes pleaded with her, and she found herself agreeing. "Okay," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Zach's face lit up with joy. and he quickly ushered Zahara and Nadia out of the room, leaving Namaya alone with him. As they said their goodnights, Namaya couldn't shake off the feeling that she was getting in over her head, but Zach's charm and charisma had her under his spell, and she found herself following him to his bedroom, her heart pounding with anticipation. Namaya woke up to an empty bed. She looked around, disoriented, and saw that she was in Zach's bedroom. Memories of the previous night came flooding back, and she felt a mix of emotions, excitement, guilt, and confusion. She got out of bed and began to get dressed, wondering where Zach was. As she walked out of the bedroom, she saw him in the kitchen, making breakfast. "Good morning," he said, smiling at her. "How did you sleep?" Namaya hesitated, unsure of how to respond. She had slept well, but the dream she had afterwards still lingered in her mind. "It was fine," she said finally. "Thanks for asking." Zach handed her a cup of coffee and a plate of pancakes. "I'm glad you could stay over," he said, his eyes locked on hers. "I had a great time last night." Namaya felt a flutter in her chest as she met his gaze. She had to admit, she had enjoyed herself too. As they ate breakfast, Zahara and Nadia joined them, chatting about their plans for the day. Namaya was relieved to have her friends around her, but she couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off. After breakfast, Zach drove them home, dropping off Zahara and Nadia first. As Namaya got out of the car, he leaned over and whispered, "I'll call you later." Namaya smiled and nodded, feeling a spark of electricity as their hands touched. As she watched him drive away, she couldn't help but wonder what she had gotten herself into. Namaya couldn't concentrate at work. Her mind kept wandering back to Zach and the strange occurrences of the previous night. She had tried to brush it off as mere fantasy, but the memory of his touch lingered on her skin. As she worked, she started to feel a creeping sense of unease. It was as if someone was watching her, but every time she turned around, there was no one there. She tried to shake off the feeling, but it only intensified as the day went on. She began to feel like she was losing her grip on reality. When she got home, she was relieved to find Zahara and Nadia waiting for her. They had planned a movie night, and Namaya was grateful for the distraction, but as they watched the movie, Namaya couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off. She kept looking over her shoulder, expecting to see Zach standing there. "Guys, I need to tell you something," she said finally, pausing the movie. "I've been feeling really weird all day. Like someone's watching me." Zahara and Nadia exchanged concerned glances. "What's going on, Namaya?" Zahara asked. Namaya hesitated, unsure of how to explain. "I don't know. It's just this feeling. And I had this dream last night. It was so real." Nadia leaned in. "Tell us about the dream." Namaya took a deep breath and began to recount the dream, leaving out no details. As she spoke, she felt a chill run down her spine. Namaya's dream was vivid and intense. She saw herself and Zach in a passionate embrace, their bodies entwined as they made love. Every touch, every kiss, every thrust felt incredibly real. She felt Zach's hands on her skin, his lips on her neck, his body moving inside hers. The pleasure was overwhelming, and she moaned with delight, but as suddenly as it began, the dream ended. Namaya woke up with a start, her heart racing and her body trembling. She looked around, disoriented, and saw that she was alone in her bed. She was still at her family's house, where she had grown up. There was no way Zach could be there, but the dream had felt so real. She could still feel the sensation of Zach's touch, the way her body had responded to his, and then she realized that her private parts were wet, and the bed was damp beneath her. It was as if she had really had sex, but she knew that was impossible. Namaya was confused and a little scared. She didn't understand what was happening to her. She had never had a dream that felt so real before. She got out of bed and went to the bathroom to clean up, trying to shake off the feeling of unease. But she couldn't shake off the memory of Zach's touch, the way her body had responded to him. Zahara and Nadia exchanged a skeptical glance. "Namaya, it was just a dream," Zahara repeated. "You're probably just stressed or something, but it felt so real," Namaya insisted. "And my bed was wet." I know I wasn't with anyone, so how did that happen? Nadia shrugged. Maybe you just, had a wet dream or something. Namaya shook her head. No, it wasn't like that. It was like, have you ever had a dream that felt more real than your actual life? Zahara and Nadia looked at each other uncertainly. No, not really, Zahara admitted. Exactly, Namaya said. This was different. And I'm telling you, it felt like Zach was really there with me, and Nadia raised an eyebrow. Zach? The guy from the bar? Namaya nodded. Yes, him. I know it sounds crazy, but I feel like there's something going on that I don't understand. Zahara and Nadia exchanged another glance, this time with a hint of concern. Namaya, maybe you should take a break from dating for a while, Zahara suggested. You're clearly stressed out, but Namaya knew that wasn't the solution. She knew that something strange was happening, and she was determined to get to the bottom of it. Namaya decided to take matters into her own hands. She wanted to know more about Zach and the strange occurrences that had been happening. So, she decided to visit his house. She remembered the address he had given her, and she plugged it into her GPS. As she drove, she felt a sense of trepidation. What would she find? When she arrived, she was shocked. The address led to an old, abandoned building. It looked like it had been vacant for decades. The windows were boarded up, and the door was covered in cobwebs. Namaya got out of her car and approached the building cautiously. She looked around, wondering if she had made a mistake. But the address was correct. She tried the door. But it was locked. She peered through the windows, but saw nothing but darkness and decay. Where was Zach's luxurious mansion? This couldn't be the right place. Namaya felt a shiver run down her spine. Something was off. She decided to investigate further. She walked around the building, looking for any clues. And then, she saw it. A small inscription on the wall, almost hidden by the ivy, Zach's residence. It read, Estimated 1850. Namaya's heart skipped a beat. 1850? That was impossible. Zach couldn't be that old. She felt like she was in a nightmare. What was going on? Namaya decided to ask the neighbors if they knew anything about the abandoned building or Zach. She approached an elderly woman who was tending to her garden. Excuse me, Namaya said. I'm trying to find out about the old building next door. Do you know anything about it? The woman looked up, surprised. That place? It's been abandoned for years. The owner died a long time ago. Namaya's heart sank. Do you know anything about a man named Zach? He claimed to live there. The woman's expression changed to one of sadness. Zach? Oh, dear, he used to live in this neighborhood, but he passed away many years ago. He was a nice young man, but he's gone now. Namaya felt like she had been punched in the gut. But I met him. He was alive. We talked and the woman's expression turned sympathetic. I'm so sorry, dear. I don't know what to say. Maybe you're thinking of someone else. Namaya shook her head. No, it was him. I'm sure of it, the woman nodded. Well, I'm afraid it's not possible. Zach is gone. He died in a tragic accident many years ago. Namaya thanked the woman and walked back to her car, feeling stunned and confused. What was going on? Who was the Zach she had met? And why did he claim to live in a house that had been abandoned for years? Namaya felt like she was losing her grip on reality. She had met Zach, she was sure of it. They had talked, laughed, and done things. But now, it seemed like he never existed. She drove home in a daze, her mind racing with questions. Was she going crazy? Had she imagined the whole thing? As she walked into her house, she felt like she was trapped in a nightmare. Everything seemed surreal, like she was living in a dream. She tried to shake off the feeling, but it only intensified as the days went by. She couldn't concentrate at work, she couldn't sleep at night. She felt like she was running mad. She started to question her own sanity. Had she really met Zach, or was it all just a product of her imagination? She felt like she was losing herself, like she was disappearing into a void of confusion and uncertainty. One night, she found herself driving back to the abandoned house, hoping to find some answers. But as she stood in front of the decaying building, she realized that she was alone. Truly alone, and that's when it hit her, the crushing realization that she might never find the truth. Nadia stood in front of the abandoned house, feeling the weight of her sanity slipping away. She had to know the truth. She had to know what was real and what wasn't. As she approached the house, she noticed something strange. The front door, which had been locked and boarded up before, was now slightly ajar. She hesitated for a moment, wondering if she should investigate. But her need for answers overpowered her fear. She pushed open the door and stepped inside. The house was dark and musty, filled with cobwebs and decay. But as she looked around, she saw something that made her blood run cold, a series of old photographs, depicting a young man who looked uncannily like Zach. But it was the date stamped on the photos that made her heart stop. They were taken over a century ago. Nadia felt like she had been punched in the gut. She stumbled backward, trying to make sense of what she was seeing, and then she saw it. A name etched into the wall. Zachariah, it read. Died 1850. Nadia's world went black. Nadia came to, lying on the floor of the abandoned house. She was disoriented and confused, but as she looked around, the memories came flooding back, the photographs, the name etched into the wall, the realization that Zach was dead. She stumbled to her feet, trying to make sense of it all. But as she looked around, she saw something that made her heart skip a beat, a figure, standing in the shadows. Zach, she whispered, her voice trembling. The figure stepped forward, and Nadia saw that it was indeed Zach. But his eyes were different, cold and dead. You shouldn't have come here, he said, his voice low and menacing. Nadia tried to run, but her feet felt heavy, as if rooted to the spot, and then, everything went black. Nadia woke up to find herself in a dark, damp cellar. She was lying on a cold, stone floor, and her head was pounding. She tried to remember how she got there, but her memories were hazy. As she looked around, she saw Zach standing in the corner, watching her. His eyes were still cold and dead, and Nadia felt a chill run down her spine. Where am I? She demanded, trying to keep her voice steady. You're in my home, Zach replied, his voice low and menacing. And you'll never leave. Nadia's heart sank. She was trapped. Why? She asked, trying to keep her voice calm. What do you want from me? Zach smiled, but it was a cold, mirthless smile. I want your soul, he said. And I'll take it, no matter what it takes. Nadia was horrified. She realized that Zach was not human, but a malevolent spirit who had been trapped in the house for centuries, and she was his next victim. Nadia knew she had to escape, but the cellar was damp and dark, with no visible exits. Zach was watching her, his eyes gleaming with malevolence. She tried to think clearly, but her mind was racing. She remembered the photographs, the name etched into the wall, and the realization that Zach was dead. Suddenly, an idea struck her. She remembered the inscription on the wall, Zachariah, died 1850. She realized that Zach was trapped between worlds, and that she had to find a way to release him. Zach, listen to me, she said, trying to keep her voice calm. I know what you are. I know you're trapped. Let me help you, Zach sneered, but Nadia saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. No one can help me, he growled. I am cursed. Nadia took a step forward, trying to reason with him. I can help you, she said. I can find a way to release you. Zach laughed, a cold, mirthless sound. You can't, he said. But you can try, and with that, he vanished, leaving Nadia alone in the darkness. Nadia was left alone in the darkness, but she refused to give up. She knew she had to find a way to release Zach's spirit, and she was determined to do it. As she felt her way through the darkness, her hand stumbled upon an old, dusty diary. She opened it, and a faint light emanated from the pages. The diary belonged to Zachariah, and it told the story of his life and death. Nadia read with tears in her eyes, learning about the young man who had been trapped between worlds for so long. As she read, she discovered a hidden message, a spell that could release Zach's spirit. But it required a sacrifice, one that Namaya was not sure she was willing to make. Namaya hesitated, unsure if she was willing to make the sacrifice. But as she thought about Zach's trapped spirit, she knew she had to try. The spell required her to give up her own memories, to forget her life and her identity. Namaya was torn, but she knew it was the only way to free Zach. With a heavy heart, she began to recite the words of the spell. As she spoke, a warm light enveloped her, and she felt her memories slipping away. Zach appeared before her, his eyes filled with a mix of sadness and gratitude. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Namaya smiled, her mind foggy. "To free you," she said. "To let you go." Zach's eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment, Namaya saw a glimmer of the man he once was. "Thank you," he whispered, before vanishing into thin air. Namaya collapsed, her mind empty and her heart heavy. She had saved Zach, but at what cost? Namaya woke up to an unfamiliar ceiling. She tried to remember how she got there, but her mind was a complete blank. She didn't know her name, her age, or her past. Everything was gone. Panic set in as she scrambled to remember anything. But there was nothing. No memories, no thoughts, no identity. She stumbled out of the room, into a world that was completely foreign to her. She saw people passing by, but they meant nothing to her. She saw buildings and streets, but they held no memories. Namaya was alone, with no past and no future. She was a blank slate, and then she saw a figure in the distance. A figure she somehow knew, but couldn't remember. "Who are you?" she asked, as the figure approached. The figure smiled, and Namaya saw a glimmer of familiarity in her eyes. "You don't remember me?" she asked, her voice filled with sadness. Namaya shook her head, feeling a deep sense of loss. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm so sorry. I am Zahara and this is Nadia. We're your friends." Namaya's friends, Zahara and Nadia, sat her down in the cafe, surrounded by photos and mementos from their time together. They held her hands, and Zahara began to speak. "Namaya, we know you don't remember us, but we're your friends. We've been through thick and thin together," Nadia added. "We've shared so many memories, laughed together, cried together. You're like a sister to us." Namaya looked at them, confused, but as they spoke, something stirred inside her. A faint glimmer of recognition. Zahara showed her a photo of the three of them on a hike. "Remember this trip?" she asked. Namaya studied the photo, and suddenly, a fragment of memory surfaced. She remembered the hike, the laughter, and the inside jokes they shared. Nadia smiled. "That's it. You're remembering." As they continued to share stories and memories, Namaya's mind began to clear. She remembered her friends, her family, and her life before the memory loss. Tears of joy streamed down her face as she hugged Zahara and Nadia tightly. "I remember," she whispered. "I remember it all." With her memories back, Namaya felt like herself again. She spent the next few weeks reconnecting with Zahara and Nadia, and rebuilding her life. She started taking art classes again, and found solace in painting. She reconnected with her family, and started volunteering at a local animal shelter, but despite the progress, Namaya couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off. She had a sense of purpose, but couldn't quite put her finger on what it was. Zahara and Nadia noticed the change in her too. "You're not the same Namaya," Zahara said one day. "You're more contemplative." Namaya nodded. "I know. I feel like I'm meant to do something more. Something important." Nadia smiled. "You will figure it out. You're strong and capable." Namaya smiled back, feeling a sense of determination. She would find her purpose, no matter what. Namaya stood in front of her latest art piece, a vibrant painting that seemed to pulse with life. She felt a sense of pride and accomplishment, knowing that she had found her purpose. With the help of Zahara and Nadia, Namaya had discovered her passion for art and her desire to help others. She had started a non-profit organization, using art therapy to help people heal and find their own purpose. As she looked around her studio, filled with paintings and sculptures, Namaya knew that she had finally found her true self. She was no longer the lost and confused person she once was. Zahara and Nadia hugged her tightly, beaming with pride. "We knew you could do it," Zahara said. Namaya smiled, feeling a sense of gratitude and love. "I couldn't have done it without you both," she said. Together, the three friends looked towards the future, knowing that Namaya's new beginning was just the start of something beautiful. The end.